Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. This program is about conversion to our Lord Jesus and the church. And it always seems appropriate when we're talking about conversion during this time of the year, because depending on where you live, everything's happening outside that is God's way of letting us visually see conversion. If you live down south, you may not see the changes quite so much, but if you live up north like I do, there's cold and there's ice and there's snow and there's changes in what we wear to combat the cold and the wind and the snow. And that's the Lord's visual way of letting us see that in our connection with the world, conversion involves change, movement. And sometimes that change brings about great joy, and sometimes it brings about challenges, because usually conversion means saying goodbye to things that you leave behind and moving forward. And our goal is to follow our Lord Jesus Christ and where he leads us. And for many of the guests in the journey home, it led them to a place that they didn't expect to go. And that's often the case, and I have a feeling it might be tonight. So glad you joined us. Our guest tonight is Brendan O'Morchoe, former Episcopalian. Brendan, welcome to the journey home.
Thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you here. And I usually get out of the way as soon as I can.
All right.
I invite you to start from the beginning.
Yeah, so like you said, I grew up in the Episcopalian Church from the day I was born. I was in church with my family. I grew up in suburban Illinois, north of Chicago.
All right.
And so I grew up in the Episcopal Church. It was one of those things we went every Sunday, but it wasn't anything that we really got outside of Sunday in my life. I didn't really think about it, throughout the rest of the week. And
no personal prayer life per se.
A little bit, around Christmas and Easter, I'd get out. They have the Book of Common Prayer,
right.
Which I had a copy that was given to me when I was baptized, and so I'd get that out every once in a while in a tough time or around the holidays. But that was kind of it. Didn't really inform what I was doing.
So in terms of believing in the reality of God.
I mean, I believed in God, certainly, yes.
Okay.
But it wasn't something that I thought about when I woke up and went to school on Monday morning. I wasn't thinking, how can I serve God today? Right. That never really crossed my mind.
High church Episcopalian, low church, you think?
Yes. So grew up, the first church we went to was high church. And if you walked in there and you didn't know any better, you would have thought you were in a Catholic church. It's a beautiful church, and I haven't been back in years, and I wish I could. It's a beautiful church. And then my family moved to a different part of the Chicago area, and it took us a long time to settle somewhere, but it was the complete opposite, where it was very low church. The priests, there were two priests who were married to each other. A man and a woman were married to each other, had two kids. So that was kind of, by the time I got to about middle school and high school, that was more of the environment that I was in.
All right.
And liturgically, the Episcopal Church is very similar. So it's, but I didn't know that. I had never been to a Catholic church. I had no concept of Catholicism. I didn't really know much about it going into high school.
Was it an ambivalent view, or was there any negative?
Well, there was a little bit of a negative in terms of, they're the other guys, we don't associate with them. So my father grew up at first in Ireland. So he was born, born technically in England, but spent most of his first about 10 years or so in Ireland as an Irish Protestant in the 60s during the Troubles.
Wow.
And there's a long family history going back. His uncle, my granduncle, fought in the British Army as an Irish citizen. My great-grandfather fought in the British Army, and going long back.
But always as Irishmen.
Yes, as Irishmen in the British Army, which you could do then. I don't know if you could still do now. And so grew up with kind of the whole, it wasn't so much anti-Catholic, but sort of the idea of, in Irish Protestant, there's that huge cultural divide between the Protestants and the Catholics in Ireland, especially in the 60s. And that was kind of the culture that I grew up in, of that, making fun of, not necessarily making fun of, but sort of poking at, the idea of the Pope and how lucky we are that we get to make decisions about doctrine and things like that. It was kind of what we grew up in. I went and visited Dublin when I was in high school. And I remember, I don't remember where we were, but I remember my father pointing out some statue building, and he could feel his bed shake when the IRA had set off a bomb at that statue. And so that was kind of how I came up.
So having any kind of pro-Catholic persuasion would have been interpreted as an anti-Irish.
Yes.
From that background. It's more than just the church, it's the whole culture and the division that your family has experienced.
Yeah, so that was kind of, and it's what we're used to. And you know, I wouldn't have even said that I knew any Catholics. Looking back, I realized they were Catholic, but you know, in public school, the nearest Catholic school was 45 minutes away. Yeah. There was just never any interaction with Catholicism. I didn't know anything about it. I had no concept of most church teaching, and it was weird though, because looking back, I remember in 2005, I think was when St. John Paul II died. Yeah. And at the time, I mean, I still had no interaction really with the Catholic Church, but being fascinated by everything going on around with his death, with the funeral, and the electing the new Pope Benedict. Yeah. And I look back, and it was sort of the first time where God really put the Catholic Church into my life. I was able to sort of see and start learning and finding out things about it. But it wasn't anything that took hold. It was just sort of looking back, I could feel that pull looking back on it now. So I went through that, and I started getting a little more active in the church towards the end of my high school years. There was a Bible study with a lot of the moms and the older ladies in the Episcopal Church that I went to, and I would go during the summers. It was on Monday morning at 10 a.m. And so during the summers when I was in high school, I'd go to Bible study with them, and that was kind of sort of the beginning of starting to think about how does God act in my life. And it was definitely a new experience, because I'd never, I'd been to Sunday school up until I was about 10 or 11, and then there was a huge gap. And so I hadn't done a whole lot of study of scripture and things like that. So it was kind of cool. And I was starting to sort of examine. I did some some service. My parents are very involved in the church. My father is on the vestry, so he's one of the leaders in the church. My mother's very active in ministry and helping out and volunteering. So I was kind of starting to see that with my parents, and that kind of things started moving around in my head.
Starting to feel that challenge yourself.
Yeah.
If they take it so seriously, maybe you ought to. Okay.
Yeah. So they were always a great example for me in their faith, and I knew if I ever had a question, I could always ask my dad, who's done so much of the theological study through the years, and there's a big library in the house with all this theology books, and so I knew that, and so I'm getting towards the end of high school, and I'm getting ready to go off to college. And I was very blessed in that my parents were very hands-off. They wanted me to do what made me happy. And so that was the approach they took to college. And this was, looking back, so many just little God moments in this experience. So what they did was they gave me one of those books of 2,500 colleges, said, here you are, let us know where you want to go, and if we can afford it, you'll go. So, okay. So in addition to that, I was also a swimmer in high school. So I was also getting recruited to various colleges to swim for colleges and universities. So I thought, okay. So here I am. I'm ready to pick where I'm going to go to school. This is, huge decision and all these things. No idea what I want to do with my life.
That's a huge book. Yeah. I mean, where do you start?
You can take off. There's, I wasn't going to go to school in Oklahoma. I love Oklahoma, but it wasn't where I wanted to spend, the next 4 years. So I came up with a list of 50 schools. And I ranked them top to bottom of where I wanted to go, and started looking into them a little more. School to me that I'd never heard of was number 50 at the bottom. It's called Fordham University in the Bronx. So I started going through and examining schools and checking things off, and Fordham just kept moving up and up the list.
What was the appeal about Fordham?
It's in New York City. It ended up to me, it was the best combination of athletics and academics. Okay. So it's a Division I program, great coaches, close family, but it was also a great school academically, especially in the liberal arts, which I had the idea maybe I was going to go to law school. I don't know why I thought that. And so that was really what it was. And it was also and really it was a lot of just other schools just being disqualified, or they're not strong in this, or, not a good fit for this program, or other things like that, or I didn't want to be in certain areas. But I really wanted to get to the East Coast, experience something new, something different. I wanted a school that was bigger than where I went to high school, so that was actually one of my biggest requirements. And it was interesting being recruited through athletics and academics, and going and talking to people. Yes, it's a Catholic school, it's a Jesuit school, but for some reason that never came across. That never really clicked in my head what it was. And it's funny looking back. Georgetown was a school I really wanted to go to. I wanted to go to Georgetown. I took a recruiting trip out there. I really wanted to go to Georgetown. And I had at the time never made the connection that they were both Catholic schools and even both Jesuit schools. I remember my senior year of high school, I thought that a Jesuit was just another denomination of Christianity. Didn't even realize that it was a Catholic school. And so it got down to just a handful of schools, and I didn't get into Georgetown. Was a huge, long story behind that, but I didn't get into Georgetown. And I thank God every day that I did not get into Georgetown, because if I did go to Georgetown, I would probably not be where I am today. And so it came down to Fordham or Binghamton, which is a public school, upstate New York. Yep. In the middle of nowhere, basically. And so at that point, it was pretty obvious where I was supposed to go. So I called up coach and said, I'll see you in the fall, and was on my way. And really looking back, it was a total God thing. He led me where he needed to be. The first time I ever went to New York City was the day before I moved in freshman year. I never visited it. I just had the feeling that this was the right place to be. This is where I'm supposed to go. Couldn't have even at the time, probably not even prescribed that to God acting in my life, but it was just, that's where I'm supposed to be.
That was one of the file folders of your thinking. Is this what you want me to do, God?
No, I made an Excel sheet. That was not one of the columns of the Excel sheets.
Okay.
So went off, and just little things happened between.
Now wait a second. So in the recruitment of you in the discussion, they just aren't mentioning that it's a Catholic school.
They do mention that it's a Catholic school, yes.
Okay, but it's not one of their high points.
I think what it was, especially talking to other people, having come from a public high school versus a lot of students came from Catholic high schools, I think they played it up a lot more for the students who went to a Catholic high school, seeing that as much more of a draw for them. And so I know that at times they do certainly talk about that they're a Catholic school, and they talk about their Catholic mission,
right?
Which is. Yeah,
but since you were a public school, they didn't think that was going to be one of the selling points for you. Okay.
So I didn't see a lot of that. It doesn't matter. The Jesuit University of New York, still having no idea what a Jesuit was. I had no concept of religious orders in general, and so went kind of having this vague idea that it's a Catholic school, and I knew, all right, I really wanted to maintain my Episcopal identity. It was funny, as I was going through some of my old stuff, preparing for this, I found some emails that I'd sent back to the women from the Bible study that I was in at the Episcopal Church, and how I was determined to maintain my Episcopal identity. I was going to do this, this, and this, and it was that the Catholics weren't going to get me. And so
you have a whole prayer group of ladies on their knees every day, praying that you don't get captured by those Catholics, right?
Yeah, okay. I think so. So, and little things happened. So I ended up in this, in a new dorm that was on the other side of campus from all the other freshmen. So instead of being sort of in the athletics bubble, I was in this new sort of realm of regular students, which was a little new to me. And so I got involved in a lot of different things, which was interesting at first. And so the funniest thing about this was I ended up going to the Catholic Church on campus for really one main reason. And that was that the Episcopal Church, nearest Episcopal Church is in White Plains, New York, which is a half-an-hour train ride each way at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning, which wasn't going to happen. The Catholic Church, there's a beautiful Catholic church on campus, the Fordham University Church. It was 9 p.m., all my friends went there. I could walk there. It was great. It was all young people. And I thought, oh, well, liturgically, it's close enough, right? And so started going to the Catholic Church on campus, still again, determined I wasn't going to become one of them, but I could at least go, right? You know, it's similar. And so it was a place that I immediately felt very comfortable in. And I was still sort of, you know, moved 1,000 miles away. Didn't know, I had a sister, my sister lived in Philadelphia, otherwise didn't know a single person. And I was, you know, time of growth, time of change, you're starting off in college. And so I'm starting to just explore all these different things, and you're required to take these philosophy and these theology courses and things like there's a statue of Mary on campus. I've never seen that before. There's, you know, just the idea of being surrounded by religion and your faith and making that a part of your everyday life and how you approach the world was very new to me. And so it was, I think, a great opportunity for me to just start growing and exploring and listening, and God really just opened up my heart.
Well, were you finding that the Catholic identity was indeed a part of the culture there?
It definitely is, yes. And especially if you go find it. You can, I mean, there's a chapel in almost every dorm. There's crucifixes in a lot of the classrooms and outside the classrooms, and there's priests walking around campus, and they're all very outgoing. There's the Jesuit scholastics are there, so there are a small handful of Jesuit schools in the United States that host the First Studies program, which is part of the Jesuit formation. And so about 25% of all North American Jesuits come through Fordham to do their First Studies, and they live just off campus, and they're, you know, walking around in their collar and all that. So you could definitely feel that there was a Catholic identity, and it was a part of the education and part of, and I think part of that, it might have been some of the professors that I had. There was my first philosophy professor. Definitely it was a part of what we did in our classroom, was examining that. Or for my first theology professor was, you know, how do we examine our faith, and how do we work that? How do we make this a part of what we do? And so I started going to the Catholic Church more regularly, and you know, again, all my friends, I got involved started getting involved in the pro-life stuff on campus, and which again, we can talk more later, but if you had asked me when I'd shown up on campus what abortion was or is, I would have looked at you like you had a third eye. I had no concept of what this was. So I started doing that, and I got invited.
Which, I don't want to interrupt, but that says that your particular Episcopal upbringing didn't bring that topic to your awareness.
Never once talked about it. It was never in any of my Sunday school classes. I never heard a homily or sermon about it. It was never mentioned during prayer. Never in any of the books that I had. Nothing. Never heard of it. Never knew what it was.
Okay.
And it was definitely not a thing that was talked about in the Episcopal Church.
All right.
So I'm going, and I get invited to that fall of my freshman year. There's Ignatian Heritage Week. So the Jesuits were founded by St. Ignatius Loyola in the 16th century, and I think the main reason I went was because there was free food. I don't know that I otherwise would have chosen to go, but you know, on a college campus, free pizza and a T-shirt will get a bunch of students to show up.
Yep.
And so there was this. It was a Bible study with some of the Jesuit scholastics, and it was the first time that I'd ever really encountered Catholics in daily life. So I'm still coming from the background of the Catholics are the other. Not so much. It was never that I hated Catholics or anything like that, or it was just they're the other, and we're not. And we just never had any of that daily interaction. And so I started, and that was my first opportunity to meet face-to-face Catholics who were normal people, or so I thought, who are I think similar to me. And that's kind of where it all started, was doing that. And that was when I started, talking to people. What is this Catholic thing? What does all this stuff mean? All this stuff is going on around me. And I have no idea what any of it means, no idea where it all comes from, no idea that it's all scripturally based. and all this other new experiences, and it was a lot to take in. And so I started doing that, and that was when I first got involved in the Respect for Life Club on campus. It was I kind of grew up generally conservative. Didn't really, I never really examined a lot of these issues, and it came up actually in one of my classes when we were. It was the philosophy of human nature. It was my first semester philosophy course, and it wasn't that it was part of the syllabus, but it came up as we were talking about, especially Aristotelian philosophy and the idea of entities and all this, and it just came up in conversation with the professor one day, and I started looking into it. Went to and I went and found the Pro-Life Club on campus, which was a group of very hardy students who would go, and they were praying at the abortion facility in the South Bronx every week. They would go down to there's an abortion facility in the Village in Lower Manhattan. It's one of the first Planned Parenthoods that was ever built in Margaret Sanger Square, which exists sadly. And sort of had my eyes open to the pro-life movement, and through it, all these Catholics who were practicing their faith. And at the same time, part of the Ignatian spirituality and a part of a Jesuit education is service. I forget the Latin, but the idea is we're men and women for others. And so a huge part of the campus ministry and the identity on campus is serving others, and serving the weak and the vulnerable and the poor and all this kind of stuff. And I was starting to make that connection of abortion and the preborn being the ones who are most weak and most vulnerable. And I was now seeing how these Catholics, how their faith inspired them and encouraged them to go out, to get up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, which I thought only us crazy swimmers did that. To get up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, all year round, sleet, rain, snow, freezing temperatures, every Saturday they were out there. They were talking on campus, and I thought, this is pretty great. And so I got involved with them and with college Republicans, and I started meeting all these people, and they were sort of, they knew I was, the non-Catholic in the room, which for them I'd say majority are at least grew up Catholic. And so they started talking to me about the church and all these things, and I just started asking questions. What exactly does the Pope do? What is this rosary thing over here? What's going on during Mass? Wait, saints? I don't get it. And so it was really in that having started in the pro-life movement that I was opened up to the fullness of the Catholic Church. And so as that's going through my first year in college, and started feeling these guys might be onto something. I think they've got something figured out here. And I really, just that year, into that spring, started reading everything I could find on the Catholic Church. And of course, the Jesuits especially were very happy to start throwing things at me. Read this, read that. More than I could possibly handle. Spend way more time reading that than reading for classes. That's for sure. And I started finding, what I was really drawn to in the Catholic Church was the tradition. It was, you could go and find where, Jesus said, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And that was the foundation of the Catholic Church. And that's what we're going back to, connected all the way back 2,000 years. And that tradition, and the fact that they're the community. So we all came together, and at the same time, there were millions and millions of Catholics all around the world who were doing the same thing. So the tradition, that history, then looking back, at the Episcopal Church, where it was founded when King Henry VIII wanted to change marriage, and what couldn't get any more annulments, and it seemed off. It didn't seem quite right. And I think the other thing that was really playing in my mind was I started, okay, well, I know what the Catholics teach about abortion, and I know abortion kills an innocent preborn child, and well, what does the Episcopal Church say? and they are at best murky. And so I, sort of found out that they kind of oppose abortion, but they, quote, respect the woman's right to terminate her pregnancy in certain situations. And it was very inconsistent. And I had this hard time, this cognitive dissonance of all this inconsistency within the Episcopal Church that I had known all my life. And seen all these things in the Catholic Church. And it was something that I've always strived for, is consistency in my life. And especially through studies, you start examining different issues and how, am I being consistent? Am I saying the same thing, in the morning as I am at night, in this situation, that situation? And that consistency and that fullness of the Catholic faith was very attractive to me. And I think it was really very, it came out to me, the way it spoke to me was through abortion. And recognizing that, if God created each of us, then who are we to take the life of that child? And at the same time being able to connect that with the science, with the philosophy, and knowing all these things and examining it. I eventually took a philosophical ethics course at Fordham and got into metaphysics and all this other stuff that we were studying and learning about. And it was part of what we did. The Pro-Life Club was out on campus just talking to people. And that's really what it was really inspired by the fact that we could just go and talk to people. We weren't, it was sort of the same idea of Catholics was I'd never met a real live pro-lifer before. They didn't exist. All I knew was what the media said pro-lifers did and are. And that was that they're crazy people who are, down at the abortion facility throwing Bibles at people and holding up signs. That was what I knew of pro-lifers.
Had you become aware at this time that, it's not my intent to be critical of the Episcopal Church, but that in many ways the whole history of the Episcopal Church is often centered around taking issues of pro-life in the other direction. The whole beginning was a challenge on the issue of divorce. Yeah. And then the Lambeth Conference in 1930, the decision on contraception. Really key issues all along.
Yeah. And I saw where, again, they weren't being consistent. They were changing to sort of meet what they thought was going on in culture, and they weren't staying true to the foundations of the church, and that really struck me and really bothered me. And so seeing all these things going on in the Episcopal and other issues on things that they've had in the Episcopal Church, and just seeing that I couldn't reconcile anymore what was being taught in the Episcopal Church with what I was finding that I believed. And so it was very hard for me to sort of realize that I've been wrong for a long time.
All right. Why don't we pause there? Our guest is Brendan O'Morchoe, and we're going to pause there just a little bit because it's time for a break, and we'll come back. And because I'd like to see, was there any still barriers standing in the way to keep you from making the whole move to the Catholic Church, and what was it that really was drawing you? Of course, the pro-life issues. We can get back to that after the break. All right, Brendan. Okay. Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and our guest tonight is Brendan O'Morchoe, and former Episcopalian. I've kind of paused you in the middle of your journey, and we're going to get to discussing your work as the Director of External Relations at Students for Life of America. So what you are doing now was also developing at the time you were at Fordham. Yeah. But often people can start being open to at least recognizing the Catholic Church isn't as goofy as I thought it was, and starting to see good things here and there. That's all well and good. But the issue of becoming a Catholic is often a different issue.
Yes.
Were you at that stage yet
so I'm
in
at
your
that
journey?
stage, and it's funny, what I had decided first was that I wanted to be a Jesuit priest. And there were a few priests and scholastics on campus. Father Katersky was a mentor of mine, Father Curry, who was the director of campus ministry, Ryan Duns, who was one of the Jesuit scholastics, and some people that I'd met, and I wanted to be a Jesuit priest. I'd made that decision, I think, before I really realized that I had made the decision to become Catholic. And so I'm coming home back to Illinois, summer between freshman and sophomore year, and now I'm out of the Catholic bubble again. Yeah. And I'm back into the bubble that I grew up in. And so I was very conflicted going back and forth, and I hadn't really told anybody what was going on. I hadn't, some of my friends knew that at Fordham that I was at least concerned, but hadn't told anybody what I was thinking, what was going on in my head, what was going on in my prayer life. But I remember the exact place I was when I made the decision. I was mowing my parents' lawn, and I could go back to this day and point to the exact spot I was standing where I just stopped. It's like getting hit with a ton of bricks. I got to do this. I'm going to be Catholic. And so I came back, being a sophomore year, first day I was back on campus.
What, had you told your parents?
I had not told anybody.
Okay, this was just in here.
Just in here. So I went back to the director of campus ministry, Father Curry. Said, Father Curry, I want to be Catholic. What do I do? And so, I knew him. He was the building master in the dorm I lived in freshman year. So I'd spoken with him a lot about the faith and things. So RCIA classes start in 2 weeks. We'll see you there. So at the time, I told some of my friends at Fordham that I was becoming Catholic, and they were all obviously very excited for me. But I didn't tell anyone outside of Fordham. Didn't tell anyone in my family. I was afraid to. And not so much fear as I was nervous, because I didn't know what the reaction would be.
Sure.
And so went through RCIA, thought it was great. A good friend of mine, Steve, was my sponsor, and he's got a great story coming back to the faith as well. And so getting towards end of the semester, coming on Christmas time, and again at this time I'm already convinced I'm going to become a Jesuit priest. There was no other thing that I wanted to do. And I'm getting more involved in the pro-life club and doing all these things and really coming into the fullness of the faith. And I was so excited. But I had this one friend, she kept asking me, have you told your parents yet? No, I haven't told. Have you told your parents yet? No, I haven't done that yet. And so we got towards, it was around this time, it was Advent of that year, my sophomore year of college. And after Mass one day, she takes my phone, she dials my parents' number. So you're going to do it. So I was like, okay. And I remember it was one of those deals where, so I have something I need to tell you. And just sort of, God's calling me to become Catholic. They had plans. They were going to come out for Easter and meet my sister in Philadelphia. I was going to go. I can't come to Philadelphia with you. I'm becoming Catholic that day. And it was... They weren't angry at all, for certainly not. But I think more disappointed was what I felt, and it was because it was, I think, totally hit them out of nowhere, because I never talked about it with them. I never expressed this with them.
And they would have probably shared the same lack of understanding of the church as you had.
Yeah, I think
they wouldn't get it. Why would you want to become Catholic?
I think my father had a better understanding of the Catholic Church than I did. Mm-hmm. But it was sort of, he was very, he loved the Episcopal Church and still does. Yeah. So he and I throughout the years have talked about different issues of theology and faith and been able to understand each other a little bit better. But so didn't actually talk to them for the next couple of weeks until I got home for Christmas. And it was, again, one of those, they weren't angry, but just disappointed, and they wanted to talk about it. And it was hard for me, because then I was trying to balance my commitment to my family. And what I found out later was really important to them was being able to still worship together as a family, and do those types of things and go to church together on Sunday. And where at the same time I wanted to be at the Catholic Church, because that was where I was drawn. That was where God had called me. And so went through some tough times. It was my family's always been very close. We never fight, never argue. never had any of those problems. And so it was kind of new for us. And again, it was not that we were fighting or arguing, but just trying to understand each other. And I think it was a little difficult with my parents and my sister, and they were not going to come for my confirmation, which upset me, but I was okay with that. I knew that this is what God was calling me to do, and I was very, very secure in that idea. And so they did come though, and I don't know what changed or what happened, but they came up to New York for confirmation at the Easter Vigil, my sophomore year of college, and it was an incredible. I don't think that's probably the happiest I've ever been in my life. I can't think of any moments in my life that I was happier than at that time when I was fully received and welcomed into the church and received communion, and it was just I remember every minute of it. I even remember Father Ryan had a little too much oil on his thumb and it was dripping down my face, and so just kind of went on my way. I'm a Catholic now. It was that time that I really jumped into the pro-life movement. I became president of the pro-life club on campus, and was doing all these things again. I wanted to become a priest and talking to vocations directors and all these things. And there was a little community of us who were all discerning on campus. And so we were doing that. And I was just I was living my life, as Catholic, and sort of the balance that I found was I still went to the Episcopal Church with my family every Sunday, but I would go to the Catholic Church too. And I'd go throughout the week, I'd go to Mass. And that was our balance that we had. And we didn't really talk about it much after that, and they definitely I'm so blessed in that they definitely accepted my decision, and that was, if that's what God is calling you to do, then that's what you have to do. And so I was very lucky. They gave me a rosary and a crucifix, which I found out on my mother's side. My grandfather was raised Catholic, fell away from the faith. I had never heard this before, that he'd been Catholic, and he died long before I was born anyways. So I had a crucifix that was presented to him as a child. So that was kind of cool to see sort of the different parts of my family coming together and being sort of united in that faith. So sort of, I guess, fast forwarding a little bit.
Did you end college with the assumption you were going to go into the priesthood then?
Not yet. So this is where, getting towards the end of college, I started doubting. Is this really my vocation? Is this what I want to do? And it was scary to be able to do that. And very, they have this great rule in the Jesuits: after you are confirmed and received into the church, there's a 3-year minimum before you can enter. Which meant that after college, I had to have 1 year of a regular job. And so, as this was happening, I was like, okay, maybe I need to do something else. And I wanted to get outside of the Catholic bubble, to really feel, is this the calling in my life? Because when you're on campus at Fordham, there's the Catholic churches all around you. So I took a job for the Boy Scouts. I was working for the Greater New York City Council. I was in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. I grew up in scouting, loved scouting, and so I did that, and it was sort of doing something new, something different. But I kept feeling this pro-life itch of something just not being quite right in what I was doing. And I felt like I had my priorities wrong. Not that the Scouts weren't doing great work, but that the pro-life thing was more. Yeah. It was more fulfilling. And so I thought about, working in the pro-life movement. I didn't really know. Again, I'm still trying to figure out if I'm supposed to become a priest, and all of this. And I really started getting back and spending a lot of time doing pro-life stuff back at Fordham and around New York City, and just saying, God, what do you want me to do? What am I supposed to do? And then a moment that I'll never forget, I got a phone call a Sunday afternoon, and there had been a car accident. And the field director for Students for Life of America, who I'd known from a student. So Students for Life helped me when I was a student. We grew a group from 4 people to 50 people on campus, and helped us really reach campus and do all this. So Courtney was sort of my mentor through all of that. And she was 5 months pregnant, and then John as well, and they'd been hit by a drunk driver who was going wrong way on a 2-lane highway.
Wow.
And Courtney was 5 months pregnant and died that night. And John died about 10 days later.
Wow.
And I remember just being in shock. There was a parish in Manhattan that I just spent hours and hours in front of the Eucharist praying, not knowing what to do. And I remember I went down to Charlotte for Courtney and her daughter Sophie's funeral, and then John was from near New York City, and I just felt, through all that and really sort of seeing this different part of the pro-life movement, God saying, this is where you're supposed to be. God had, in my mind, he'd hit me over the head one too many times and said, all right, this is it. Now, granted, I've only been working at the Boy Scouts for a few months. My first job out of college, only been there a few months. And I called up Students for Life, and I had relationships with them and their team, and I talked to them. I said, listen, anything you want me to do, I'll do it. And I just really felt called to work there. And John, for example, he was very similar to me. He was my age, went to a Catholic school, philosophy degree, president of the Pro-Life Club, except when God called him to the pro-life movement, he said yes. And when God called me, I had said no. And I was doing all this other stuff. And so went through a couple of weeks, what do you do with an organization when that happens? And so our vice president called up one day, and she said, we want you to be the national field director, and we want you in Virginia in 3 weeks. So I said, okay. So next day I turned in my resignation for the Boy Scouts, and 3 weeks later put everything I could fit into my car and drove down to Virginia, slept on our vice president's on a couch in her basement for a month. I didn't have a place to live yet, and just really gave myself to God and said, if this is what you want me to do, then this is what I'm going to do. And it was a huge change for me. I knew one person in the DC area and was down there, but I absolutely loved it. And now I'm into the pro-life movement. And if I thought I had been sort of into Catholicism before, now I was seeing this whole other aspect of Catholicism, people who were working in the real world and making it a part of their everyday life, introduced to just the different aspects and the faith, and being just surrounded by a lot of Catholics. Now, Students for Life, we're a secular organization, and about half of our team is non-Catholic and the other half is Catholic. And we work, a lot of the students that we work with are Catholic, and just in the last few years, being in the pro-life movement has really drawn me deeper into the faith. For example, I had never really understood confession and what it was. It all just seemed very weird to me. And so I went to confession the night before confirmation. Never went again for 4 years. Never went. It was just, I don't even want to think about that. And it was through just other people I'd met in the pro-life movement who started talking to me and explaining to me, and okay, you got to go to confession. And so that kind of brought me again deeper into the faith and into the Latin Mass community and different things like that, which was has been incredibly freeing and life-giving for me, because this is such a spiritual battle that we're in, that we have to be, our prayer life has to be part of what we do. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am, working at Students for Life, and really how it's one of, we say a lot, we're pro-life because we know that the preborn is human and you're not supposed to kill. But we are active in the pro-life movement because of our faith, because of what God has called us to do. And it really gets back to part of Ignatian spirituality. I mentioned being men and women for others. Well, the school, the president, the first day we're on campus with our parents, and the day of graduation, he says the same thing. And he apologizes to our parents for ruining their kids. And he apologizes because we're taught to be bothered by injustice. And I saw all this injustice that was happening. And I had to do something about it. And that was, I couldn't sit by while 3,300 abortions are happening every day in this country. Couldn't just sit there and not do anything. And so that faith that I had through the Catholic Church and knowing the pro-life movement really just sort of came together. And we see that a lot on campuses where students, they'll come into the pro-life movement, they'll get involved, someone will reach out to them. And they'll start learning about abortion and all these things. And then they sort of convert other parts of their life in terms of how they're living, other issues within the church, and they sort of learn and grow and sort of start connecting all the dots. And so we've seen a lot of people who've come into the pro-life movement and then come into the church that way as well.
I'm wondering, from your philosophical background, this is maybe a simplified way of looking at this, but does this connect that one of the reasons it seems that the Catholic Church is so deeply committed, unwavering to the pro-life issues is because of the emphasis on the human person as being a united body and soul, where you have those in our culture that we're only biological beings, the soul doesn't matter, that's all that we are, so there's no ultimate purpose or goals, what we do with our biological being, that affects our morality. Or many Christians are almost Gnostics. It's only the soul that matters, and we're a soul entrapped within a body. So in that sense, it ends up that what we do with the body is not that important, different varieties of that. Where the Catholic recognize we are body and soul, and that is the ground for all of our pro-life work.
Exactly, and that's a huge part of it is just knowing that life has value, and science can't give things value. If we don't have a soul, if we aren't created in the image of God, why are we valuable? And so being able to connect those things, but also recognize that God has us here on earth for a reason. And so it's definitely those two things coming together. And it was something that I had long before, or as I was sort of getting into the pro-life movement, had studied a lot of St. Thomas, where a lot of that comes from. And so that was kind of a huge connector for me. Yeah, definitely.
Also, the question of the Eucharist itself, because often Episcopalians, Anglicans emphasize they believe in the real presence, but it's a bit different than the Catholic. Was that a journey for you too in your understanding?
Yeah, it was, because, for example, adoration. I never experienced adoration in the Episcopal Church, and so it was almost like they said they believed in the real presence, but they didn't act like they believed it. And the Catholics, we act like the Eucharist is the real presence of Christ. And that was, again, drew me in. Spending time in adoration and just being present with Christ has been, just throughout the years, been a huge part of my faith journey. And again, recognizing that He is here on earth.
When I think about you down there at Fordham and the closeness to the inner city, you're close to where Dorothy Day was, and all of that movement that really was about taking seriously the words of our Lord, in which He said, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me."
Yeah.
So it's a very Christ-centered
I think about that all the time.
call. I was wondering if that was a big part of your own journey.
I think about that every day, and it's really, can I, stand before God at the end of my life and say, I did everything I could for the least of your people. And there's a great quote from Fulton Sheen. From Henry Hyde, actually quoted Fulton Sheen. Henry Hyde saying, I believe that one day those of us in the pro-life movement, when we are standing before God, we're on our own. It's just us. There'll be a chorus of voices from those we tried to save, saying, "Spare him because he loved us." And I think about that every day. And I think about how, again, that injustice this is the greatest human rights injustice our world has ever seen. And I cannot justify not doing anything.
Well, John writes from Michigan. Do you have any suggestions for how we as Catholics can use media and technology for evangelization, particularly in sharing the pro-life message?
Yeah. So really, when you're evangelizing, whether it's for the faith or for the pro-life movement, it's about relationships. And that's what our organization, Students for Life, is based off of, the idea of relationships. And so our candle, our logo is one candle lighting another candle. And what happens is, and it's the image I always think of is the Easter Vigil. If you are sort of in the rafters above the church, and from the one Paschal candle, 2 candles are lit, and it spreads across. That's how we evangelize, is talking to one person at a time. And so what you can do as someone who's pro-life, who's Catholic, is we have a great opportunity through social media to reach so many more people. You know, I can go back and talk to the people I knew in high school and reach them with a pro-life message, and engage one-on-one with people through Facebook, through Twitter, through all these other things, which was, we didn't really have the opportunity to do that before, and to share the technology and to share the message. And so really having those one-on-one conversations in your everyday life, whether it's in person or online.
All right. Another email, Lloyd from Missouri. How would Brendan respond to the popular idea that men shouldn't have any say in whether or not a woman should have an abortion, or in promoting pro-life values, since, quote, the right to choose, unquote, is a woman's issue? As a man, I'm never quite sure how to refute this claim.
Yeah, it can be difficult and can be challenging. I've heard that a lot. You know, you're just a man, you're never gonna get pregnant. How can you tell me what to do? And I think we need to remember what's at stake, what an abortion is. An abortion is the taking of the life of an innocent child. And so when someone says, oh, it's about a woman's right to choose what? What are you choosing in an abortion? And so thinking again, we are called to, whether we're a man or a woman, we are called to stand for and protect the least of God's people. And so that's what we have to do. And so when someone challenges me on that, I'll often say, you're right. I'm a man. I'm not going to become pregnant. But that's not the issue here. Yeah. The issue is, what is the preborn and what happens during an abortion? And let's talk about that. And so you sort of acknowledge, yeah, you're right, but that's not what we're talking about. And get back to, whenever you're talking with someone who isn't pro-life about abortion, you always want to get back to, what is the preborn?
Yeah, I've heard some who have that argument use that place in the Gospels where our Lord is criticizing the Pharisees for putting burdens on people's backs that they themselves can't carry. And saying, you men put this burden on our backs that you can't carry. Well, that wasn't the point of what Christ was saying. They were putting their man-made traditions, their interpretations of the law, building it, and making it a burden that people couldn't carry. It wasn't about standing for what's true. And that's what you're saying. It's, you know, we woman and man stand together and look at what's true, and we defend it together. That's what that's about. Yeah. We're not trying to put burdens on people. We want to share those burdens and help them, you know, live their lives in, so that one day when they stand before our Lord, they stand before our Lord without embarrassment. That's our call, as you were saying earlier. I've done everything, Lord, man or woman, for what is good. Got a email. Jordan from Winston-Salem writes, what would be a good way to dialogue with a non-Christian to explain the sanctity of human life and that a person's worth isn't based on his or her usefulness? Obviously, you would need to appeal to rational arguments, not faith-based assumptions.
And that's what we do on campuses, because it's interesting. It's cooler to be pro-life on a college campus than, say, Christian or conservative. The majority of 18 to 24-year-olds are pro-life, but you're still going into the campus culture, which is a very secular culture, and even at Christian schools, there are people who are secular and atheist, and so what you can't do is appeal to the authority of Scripture. Because they've already rejected that authority. And so you have to dialogue with them, and really it's a matter of finding out what they actually think and believe. Why are they pro-choice or pro-abortion? Why do they support abortion rights? And leading into, okay, where's the common ground we can find? You know, most people, 70, 80% of Americans think abortion after 20 weeks is wrong. Okay, well, we can there's our starting point. And we can go back, well, why do you think it's wrong? and just asking questions and finding out what it is that they're thinking and they're believing, and really listening to them. I think a lot of pro-lifers, they don't do a good job of listening, and we've changed that in the last few years, of listening to people, and again, meeting them where they are and having that one-on-one conversation and relationship. So asking them, what you really want to get back down to is, what is the preborn? We know from science, every embryology textbook agrees, the leading pro-choice academic advocates, Peter Singer, all of them, they fully admit that at the moment of conception, you have a fully unique, whole, distinct, living human being. And so who are we to decide which humans get rights and which humans don't get rights? If living and living human beings like you and I have rights, why don't they? And so it's really important to sort of show that idea of equal rights and human rights.
Excellent, Brendan. Excellent. I want to remind everyone that a month away is our March for Life. And if they want to find out more about your work, it's studentsforlife.org.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Very good.
Yep.
Brendan, thank you very
so much.
God bless you in your work.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your witness, and I do pray that Brendan's story is an encouragement to you to follow our Lord Jesus wherever he calls you. God bless you. See you next week.